Welcome to another episode of Commending and Contending. It's a podcast about how the gospel of Jesus encourages us to live our lives and use our words to commend and contend for Jesus and his gospel. I'm your host, Jonathan Holt. Joining me today is our website editor for TGCA, Mikey Lynch. G'day, Mikey.
G'day, Jonathan. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Getting a little chilly down here in Tasmania, but hoping it'll warm up again before we plunge into winter.
You have that kind of false winter where it gets a little bit cold, then there's a bit of warmth, and then it gets really cold.
Yeah, often Easter is pretty nice here, so we're hoping and praying we get a good Easter holidays as we usually do.
Yeah, oh, terrific. Now, you have a whole lot of different hats you wear, and one of those is our TGCA website editor. That means you're across all the things going on at the website.
Yep.
What's new on the website? What can we be looking at there that might encourage us to commend and contend for the gospel?
Well, I wanted to highlight like two articles actually that what they share in common is a deep reflection about engaging with culture
Yeah.
evangelistically. Because we get a lot of stuff that's shorter, devotional pieces reflecting on the Christian life in practice. We get a lot of that kind of content, but every
Mm.
now and then we'll get a larger piece that really wrestles, sometimes theologically, and then sometimes more like missiologically. And these two are just examples of that latter one. And they're good because they're about connecting with the culture around us, but with an eye to sharing the gospel, not just a sort of a combating against us versus them. So the first of those, I mean, Kamal Weerakoon has been submitting quite a bit for us the last little while, but a month or so ago, he submitted a piece called Engaging with Western Post-Christian Inquirers Today. And he's picking up on a lot of discussion that happens is happening in the UK, and to some extent, we're seeing it on the American TGC site as well,
Yeah.
about a new degree of interest and openness amongst younger
Mm.
people from Western cultures about Christianity and the gospel, but then sounding some alarm bells about the fact that just because there's an openness to something kind of Christian doesn't mean we necessarily need to assume that actually that interest is entirely kind of pure or uncomplicated or doesn't come with its own baggage. So Kamal's wrestling with that, and he uses the bounded set, centered set kind of language that actually TGC has always used since its founding in the United States. So it's a good reflection on a bunch of those things.
Just tell us how does the bounded set, centered set thing work in terms, and then how does it apply to maybe an example issue of how we wrestle with these things around us?
Yeah, so the idea of the logic is that to some extent it's not a hard either or, but
Mm.
as a general kind of way of thinking about it, the idea of a bounded set is a group that has a really hard boundary around its outer end, either you're in or you're out.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so the focus, the emphasis of a bounded set is this crossing this line, you're in and you're out. Perhaps you could say born in a particular ethnic group or got baptized, some kind of hard line.
Mm.
And a lot of focus then is on, managing that in or out line. Now, every group has that to some extent, but the emphasis of a centered set in terms of emphasis is instead it's about it's expecting a degree of variation as people get closer to a hard center. And so there still is you could say that center still has a boundary to it. Do you know what I mean? There
Mm.
still is
Mm.
an in and or out eventually, but there's more tolerance of people drawing in closer to that.
Mm.
And so you see it in things like TGCA and TGC USA and elsewhere, where the commitment is to a very strong center for, say, the writers and the council and those core affiliated members. But then you have kind of like a cloud that gets less dense as people, where people say, "Oh, yeah, I kind of like what you guys are about, but don't agree with this," or that's the kind of the idea. And so Kamal is observing the fact that, well, as you're evangelizing people who are showing curiosity and interest and openness and even willingness to sort of participate to some extent with church liturgy or something, the centered set approach enables you to relax on having to police every belief and every behavior and every issue straight away. Um, and yet there still does come a point, where you should say, well, hang on, like, are you actually a Christian or are you just
Just enjoying
Christian-ish.
the community and being like
Yeah.
one. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
That.
yeah. So he says in the article, the Bible sets out certain requirements for authentic Christian identity. I'm quoting here.
Mm,
And the church has systematized particular doctrines, belief in God's existence as one benevolent,
mm,
almighty, universal creator, and our responsibility to him, the depth of human sinfulness, rendering us unable. And he goes on and lists kind of doctrinal truths. And, he says anyone who really wants to journey towards the real life, the real Jesus, needs to appropriate these beliefs to themselves. And so he's helpful in the sense that he says, let's be generous to people as they're expressing curiosity,
mm.
but sooner or later, let's also be real with them about this. Are you in or are you out in terms of submitting to Jesus as Lord and joining the church, which is a community of a doctrinal community. It's got traditional beliefs and practices. So yeah, he kind of has a both and there that I think is really
Mm.
really helpful and really healthy, actually. Yeah.
And what was the other article? You said there was two that were both helpful in
hmm
this area.
hmm So that one is very much looking ahead, right? Whereas the second article that's similar is actually we reposted this from Michael Jensen's Substack with his permission. It's called A Journey into the Postmodern Hinterland, and he's
Oi.
looking back at his time at university at
Yeah.
Sydney Uni back in the 80s and 90s, and particularly at postmodernism, which has had its heyday. He refers to it as something of a passing intellectual fad in the
Mm,
article, but again, it's this process of him reflecting on, well, what was what was the postmodern philosophy seeing, identifying, putting its finger on accurately, that we don't need to be completely defensive against it and scared of it. So there's a degree to which we can be open to hearing different views and philosophies. But then where was it hypocritical? Where was it disingenuous? Where was it claiming to be suspicious of totalizing views, but became just as totalizing in its own
mm,
views, from its own standpoint as the views it was criticizing, and that's in a sense we've inherited that, haven't we, with things like what gets called kind of woke culture or cancel culture, where stuff that has been born out of postmodernism has ended up seeming kind of like a new Puritanism in a way.
mm.
And yeah, towards the end of that article, Michael says that postmodernism, quoting from him, was an intellectual fad. This doesn't mean you can dismiss it, just as we shouldn't completely dismiss Marxism. It has something to say about the world that was true. But he says, if I could have my time again at university, I wouldn't be so afraid and intimidated by the postmoderns. Their impact has, in some respects, been nefarious, the seepage of their ideas into English departments and education departments and then onto high school curricula was an intellectual disaster of the highest order. And then later he says the problem with postmodernism was it was not suspicious enough. It wasn't suspicious of its own flaws and its own hang-ups and its own totalizing. So that's just a really great. I guess both of the articles give you a confident posture towards changes in our culture, but also a willingness to be critical and discerning and draw lines. It's not, again, not either or. It's not either us versus the culture or us totally becoming relevant and immersed in the culture, but it's this in the world and not of the world, right? It's where we're citizens of heaven, but we still live as citizens of this world for a time as well. And so they're just both really great examples of applying that kind of outlook that I think is pretty central to the TGC America and Australia sort of ministry values and theological vision. Yeah, it's just that in practice, I think.
Now, Mike, I wanted to bring to you a much older article. This one
Yeah.
was first published 7 years ago by Jane Tour. It's called Eight Ways to Become More Humble. And she totally delivers. There are 8 ways to become more humble. I think they're all 8 are good. One that stood out to me, though, number 3 on her list of ways to be humble was to be ready to accept humiliations. Now, I think I wasn't ready for that one to be on the list, But
Yeah.
she points out, and I'll quote from the article here. She says, "Be ready to accept humiliations, as we can learn a lot when we're at the bottom of the pecking order, which for many of us is out of our comfort zone." So we're really not used to being at the bottom. We're not used to failing. We cover up our failures. We cover up anything that makes us feel humiliated. And there are good reasons for that. I guess, feeling humiliated is a pretty horrible feeling. It's
Yeah.
it's one we do our most to avoid. But I wonder whether in all that kind of self-protectiveness to avoid humiliation, we actually miss the chance to learn to be humble. It reminds me of that, the story Jesus tells where he talks about the person coming to the wedding banquet and purposefully taking the lower seat,
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to be a tough moment if you're asked to move to a less important seat. No one, I've never seen anyone at a wedding reception I've ever been to who isn't in the bridal party go up and take the central spot on the bridal party table. No one does it because we all know that we'll be knocked down a few pegs because unless it's our wedding, that's not our table. And I think I need to learn to be ready to accept those humiliations with a bit more grace.
Yeah, there is an important place for standing up for what's true and what's right, and for workers, like I guess there's a lot of talk about, treating workers well and volunteers well and them speaking up. Like there's a really important place for all those things. And the Apostle Paul does that, doesn't he, in Philippi when they're beaten and imprisoned, and when it becomes clear that actually he's a Roman citizen, the story changes and it's like, oh, okay, well,
Mm,
sorry about that. And he insists, he says, no, I want you to publicly, lead me out. This is in Acts 16, so that people can see. And that's not just his concern for his own reputation, but it's for actually the credibility of the gospel and this church that's been started there, that he's willing. So there is a place for making those stand. Just like standing for good treatment of volunteers isn't just about yourself being precious. It's about all the other volunteers to come, right? And you
mm,
want to make sure if you make a stand, they'll get looked after better down the track. So there's a place for that. But at the same time, like Jesus, and says, if someone asks you, humiliates you by forcing you to go 1 mile, be willing to go two. If they force you to take a cloak, give them this shirt as well. All this kind of stuff. And when he rebukes the Corinthians for their litigiousness, he says, "Why wouldn't you rather be wronged? Why wouldn't you rather be cheated? Instead you're taking each other to court." And so, yeah, it is a helpful thing to go. There's a place for standing for truth, justice, against systemic issues, for your own self-protection. There's a point where it's a different story, right? Where you're just protecting your own safety, psychological safety, whatever. But there's a whole lot of other bandwidth. It's not either or, is it? There's also
mm,
space when you go, you know what, here, I'm going to wear that. That was unfair, but I'm going to let it pass. That was embarrassing, humiliating, unkind, but in the scheme of things, yeah, I'm going to accept that. I'm going to see that as actually good to go, well, in the end, who am I? I'm just a servant.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I got treated like a servant. It wasn't nice, but I know I'm a servant of the King Jesus. And so on that level, it enables you to pick your battles, doesn't it? And
Mm,
picking your battles helps you be strategic, it helps you keep relationships and foster
mm,
relationships rather than keep cutting people off. Um, yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of benefits that, and as Jane is saying, it also helps foster an attitude. If you don't stew over it in your heart, but if you actually make peace with it, it actually fosters a meek kind of character of just going, yeah, that's all right. I mean, it's just what was in the end, it was just my ego, or it was just
mm.
credit or whatever, like whatever, like yeah,
And maybe tied to that, I think I also liked number 5 on her list, have a sense of humor. That is the way in which we think about ourselves in the
mm,
situations we're in and being ready to laugh at ourselves. She writes, you have to be serious about some things, but don't take yourself too seriously. And I
yep,
wonder whether sometimes we get a little bit self-important. We feel like we ought to be kind of more listened to, more respected, our opinions sought out. And when we stumble, that kind of sense of wanting to quickly cover it up rather than have a chuckle about the way that actually we're going to trip over more often than not. And how we respond to the tripping over is probably quite indicative of where we're at in terms of working on and growing humility.
Yep. 100% true. Yeah, it's a person who can't laugh at themselves in a genuine way is a risky person to be around. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a fragility that comes with taking yourself too seriously. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's heaps more that Jane has in this article, and it's an old one that's really worth having a look at. We'll share the link to each of the articles we've been talking about in the show notes, and maybe we'll see some of these get into the kind of top 5 most read articles.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
can I say one thing we've just started doing this year as well on the website, partly in the spirit of this kind of digging up some old gold, because we've been around for quite some time now here in
mm,
Australia. What is it, 2017? Was it something
yeah,
like
about
this?
then. Yeah, almost 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I've started on Thursdays. It's a thing that's kind of existed in Instagram for a long time, Throwback Thursdays, where you'd
Oh, yeah.
share an old clip or photo from the past. And so we've now got the hashtag TBT thing, Throwback Thursdays, with on our Facebook and our Twitter or X. Every Thursday now we will be digging something up from 5 years or more ago, so that some of this great stuff that's actually sometimes it's dated, and as a result it gives you a fresh perspective because you see how the world's
Mm,
changed, and you can see things in a new light. But often, like Jane's article, it's timeless, and there's this
mm.
great stuff that we just gets lost in the mountains of the internet. And so, yeah, in addition to these podcast episodes that we're doing, Jonathan will also have those Throwback Thursdays where we'll be digging some of that stuff up for people to appreciate. And for some people, look, I mean, I'll be ministering at the moment to first year university students who 10 years ago, when Gospel Coalition started, they were 9, 8 or 9 years old, so they weren't reading about these things back then.
Well,
So
they
for
were
them,
very
it'll be for them.
precocious if they were.
Yeah, that's right. So and for a new generation as well.
Yeah, so people can follow us on Facebook and catch those recommendations on
Yeah,
Thursday. And also, we've got a new reviews editor on board. That's really exciting. What
sure is.
exactly does a reviews editor do? Just kind of word us up on that quick.
Yeah, so in addition to publishing new articles, we also publish reviews of usually new books that get released in Australia and around the world. And that's both becomes a little bit of you get a taste of the content of the book. So even if you don't read the book, you benefit from some of its content by reading the review. But also, we aim for our reviews to be discerning. And so they'll point you in the direction of books that are well worth it, but also make kind of warn you or cue you up to keep an eye out for things that may be a little off. Or even sometimes we will engage with something that is mixed or even poor, and work you through the process of how to be discerning and critical of something. So the reviews editor is the person who gets the list of books, gets the list of potential reviewers, matchmakes a little, and
Yep.
then once a review is written, edits it, publishes it. Our goal is to have a book review every Wednesday. Since we farewelled our previous reviews editor, Jacob York, that haven't been quite, that's all been on me. And
Well,
so I
that's
haven't been
tough.
quite as consistent with weekly on Wednesdays. But the plan is with our new reviews editor, Joseph Hewitt, that he'll pick that back up. And once he finds his feet, we'll again have a Wednesday review that does that mix of things, gives you the executive summary of the book, um, helps you read it critically, appreciatively, discerningly, and then know what to buy, what to recommend, what resources are out there. And particularly, a big passion of mine
Hmm.
is for our site to help Australian writers get their work out there. And so both through our articles, but also through reviewing Australian books, we actually help this hard work from local thinkers actually find a larger audience rather
Hmm.
than someone just posting on their personal Facebook profile, their church bulletin, or publishing something with Matthias Media and selling 100 copies. We hope that kind of through some of this stuff, more people are aware of this great Australian staff, and more people benefit from it, buy it, pass it on, buy it for their growth group leaders, all that kind. Do you know what I mean? All those
Hmm.
sorts of things. Yeah.
Oh, this has been great. Thanks for chatting with me today, Mikey. Super helpful to look at these articles from the website.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me on again, Jonathan. Till next time.